She said it softly, like she was afraid the words might break us. "If you stay tonight, I'll never let you go." I arrived just as the sky was losing its color, that soft moment when evening hasn't fully settled, but the day is already letting go. Her house stood quietly at the end of the street, warm light spilling through the windows in a way that felt intentional, like she had been waiting. When she opened the door, she smiled the way someone does when they already know you'll come in, but still want to give you the choice. She wore something simple, comfortable, the kind of effortless elegance that comes from knowing yourself. No hurry in her movements. No need to impress. As she stepped aside to let me in, her hand brushed lightly against my back. Not guiding, not claiming, just a brief acknowledgement of my presence. The touch lingered longer in my mind than it did on my skin. Inside, the air smelled faintly of tea and something floral, subtle, and familiar. Her home didn't feel staged. It felt lived in. Books stacked unevenly on the coffee table. A throw blanket folded with care, but clearly used. Everything about the space carried the quiet confidence of someone who had built a life and was comfortable inside it. I suddenly felt very aware of my own restlessness, the way I was always moving towards something I couldn't quite name. "Do you want tea or wine?" she asked, already heading toward the kitchen. Her voice was calm, warm, the kind that invited honesty without demanding it. "Tea's good," I said, and she smiled over her shoulder, as if that answer told her something about me. We sat on the couch, angled toward each other, but not close enough to touch. The room was dim except for a lamp in the corner, its light softening the edges of everything. She cradled her mug in both hands, fingers wrapped around the warmth, and I found myself watching the small, thoughtful pauses between her words. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it breathe. Our conversation moved easily at first. Work, small stories, a laugh that caught us both by surprise. But even then, there was an undercurrent, something steady and unspoken. When she laughed, she leaned back slightly, her shoulders relaxing, and when she listened, she leaned in, giving me her full attention. It made me want to choose my words carefully, not out of fear, but out of respect. At one point, she crossed her legs, and our knees came close, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her through the thin space between us. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. The stillness of that moment felt heavier than any movement could have been. I realized then that this wasn't just a visit. It was an invitation, not just into her home, but into her calm, her certainty, her quiet strength. And sitting there, in the gentle glow of her living room, I felt the first shift inside me. A sense that something had already begun, even if neither of us had found the words for it yet. The tea had gone untouched for a while before either of us noticed. Steam no longer curled from the mugs, yet neither of us reached for them, as if warmth wasn't the thing we needed anymore. The conversation had slowed into something softer, less about exchanging facts and more about learning the shape of each other's thoughts. She asked questions the way someone does when they truly want to understand, not just respond. When I spoke, she didn't interrupt. She tilted her head slightly, eyes steady on mine, giving me the rare feeling of being fully seen. It made me aware of my own openness, how easily I was letting pieces of myself surface in front of her. At some point, I said something half serious about not always knowing where I was headed. I laughed it off, but she didn't. Instead, she reached out without thinking, her fingers resting lightly on my forearm. The touch was brief, instinctive, but it carried weight. Her palm was warm, grounding, and for a moment I forgot what I had been saying. "I think you'll figure it out," she said quietly. Her hand lingered just long enough for me to feel the reassurance in it before she pulled back, as if suddenly aware of the space she'd crossed. I nodded, though the words had settled deeper than encouragement. It wasn't what she said, it was how calmly she believed it. The room felt smaller after that. Not crowded, but intimate. We shifted closer without acknowledging it, our bodies adjusting in tiny, unconscious ways. When she leaned forward to set her mug down, her shoulder brushed mine. I felt the softness of her sweater against my arm, the faint scent of her perfume, something warm and familiar that made my chest tighten. There were pauses now, long ones, not uncomfortable, just full. She would start to speak, stop, smile slightly, then continue as if deciding which truths were worth sharing. When she talked about her life, it wasn't dramatic. It was reflective. She spoke of choices made carefully, of learning when to hold on and when to let go. I listened, realizing how different our timelines were and how strangely natural it felt to sit in the overlap. Her gaze lingered on me longer than before. When our eyes met, neither of us looked away. There was curiosity there and something quieter, recognition maybe. I shifted, suddenly aware of how close we were sitting now. Our knees touched this time just barely. She didn't move. The contact was steady, deliberate in its stillness, sending a slow warmth through me. I could feel my heart beating, not fast, but present. Every small sound seemed louder. The soft hum of the house, the distant noise of a car passing outside, the gentle rhythm of her breathing. She folded her hands in her lap, then unfolded them again, as if grounding herself. Neither of us said what was forming between us. We didn't need to. It lived in the spaces between sentences, in the way her fingers curled and relaxed, in the way I found myself leaning just a little closer. We were lingering between words, suspended in a moment that felt fragile and deliberate, as if once it passed, something would change, and neither of us was ready to rush it. The quiet didn't arrive all at once. It settled slowly, like the house itself was exhaling around us. At some point, I stood and drifted toward the window, more out of instinct than intention. Outside, the street was dim and calm, the kind of stillness that makes you aware of your own thoughts. I rested my palm against the glass, cool beneath my skin, and let my gaze unfocus. Behind me, I could feel her presence even before she moved. She didn't rush to fill the space. I admired that about her, the way she allowed silence to exist without trying to fix it. But inside me, something had begun to tighten. I thought about how this looked, how it felt to sit in her living room, surrounded by the quiet certainty of her life, while mine still felt like it was unfolding one uncertain step at a time. I wasn't ashamed of where I was. I just wasn't sure how I fit into her world. The closeness we'd shared moments ago now felt heavier, not because it was wrong, but because it mattered. I heard her footsteps softly behind me, stopping a respectful distance away. She didn't touch me. Instead, she spoke my name, gently, as if testing how it would sound in the stillness. "You went quiet," she said. Not an accusation, an observation. I swallowed and nodded, still facing the window. "I didn't mean to," I replied. "I just started thinking." There was a pause, then the faint sound of her shifting her weight. "About us?" she asked, her voice low and careful. That word, us, landed with more force than I expected. I turned slightly, enough to see her reflection in the glass. Her expression was calm, open, but her hands were clasped loosely in front of her, betraying a hint of tension she hadn't let show before. "About everything," I said honestly. "About what this is, what it could be." She stepped closer then, just enough that I could feel the warmth of her near me. Still, she didn't reach out. "And does it scare you?" she asked. I hesitated, searching for the right answer. "It makes me think," I said finally, "about whether I'm ready, about how people see things, about how different our lives are." She nodded slowly, as if she had already walked through those thoughts herself. "I understand that," she said, "more than you think." Her honesty eased something in me. She wasn't brushing past the difficulty. She was standing right in it with me. She moved beside me at the window now, her shoulder close to mine, the distance between us narrow but intentional. "I don't need you to decide anything tonight," she continued. "I just need you to be honest." Her words settled softly, like a hand placed over my racing thoughts. I turned fully toward her then, meeting her eyes. There was no expectation there, no pressure, just presence. In that moment, I realized the weight I'd been carrying wasn't fear of her. It was fear of what choosing her might mean. And standing there together, framed by the quiet night and the reflection of two people learning how to see each other clearly, I felt the tension deepen. Not enough to break us apart, but enough to make what came next matter. She was the one who broke the stillness, but not with movement. She stayed beside me at the window, her reflection overlapping mine in the glass, two shapes sharing the same quiet space. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before, as if the words themselves needed care. "People think I have everything figured out," she said, "that I'm steady, certain." She paused, her gaze lowering briefly, then lifting again to meet mine. "Most days I am, but that doesn't mean I don't get tired." I listened without interrupting, sensing how deliberate each word was. This wasn't something she offered lightly. She leaned back against the counter, folding her arms loosely, not in defense, but in restraint, as if holding herself together while allowing a crack to show. "There are moments," she continued, "when the quiet feels heavier than it should, when strength becomes something people expect instead of something I choose." She gave a small, almost self-aware smile. "I don't talk about that often." The room felt warmer suddenly, or maybe I was just more aware of her. I stepped closer, not fully realizing I had moved until I was there. "You don't seem weak," I said, then corrected myself. "You seem human." Her breath caught, not dramatically, just a subtle pause. She looked at me, then really looked at me, as if measuring whether it was safe to stay open. "I don't need to be saved," she said quietly. "But sometimes I want to be seen." The honesty in her voice stirred something in my chest. I reached for her hand, slow enough that she could have pulled away if she wanted to. My fingers brushed hers first, a question more than a gesture. When she didn't move, I let my hand settle around hers fully. Her skin was cool at first, then warmed against mine. She exhaled a long breath she'd been holding, and her shoulders relaxed in a way that felt intimate. Our hands fit together naturally, not tightly, but securely, like something that had been waiting. She didn't look at our hands. She looked at me. "I didn't expect this," she admitted. "You came into my life quietly, and suddenly, I'm aware of you in ways I didn't plan for." I swallowed, my thumb brushing gently against the back of her hand, a small, grounding motion. "I feel it too," I said. "I just didn't know if I was allowed to." Her lips curved into a soft smile, touched with something vulnerable. "Feelings don't usually ask permission," she said. We stood there like that, hands joined, the rest of the world narrowing to the space between us. I could feel her pulse beneath my fingers, steady but present, mirroring the calm intensity in her eyes. There was no rush, no escalation, just the weight of what had been shared settling around us. This was the confession, not spoken as a declaration, but revealed through honesty, through touch, through the choice to stay open. And in that moment, I understood that intimacy wasn't about grand gestures. It was about standing close enough to let someone see the parts you usually keep hidden and choosing not to look away. The night had deepened without either of us noticing. Somewhere outside, the quiet had changed. The distant sounds fewer now, the world settling into itself. I glanced at the clock and felt that familiar pull of responsibility, of knowing when to leave before something becomes too real. I released her hand slowly, not because I wanted to, but because part of me still believed leaving was the safer choice. "I should probably go," I said, the words feeling heavier than they should have. She didn't react right away. She nodded once, slowly, as if she had expected this moment. There was no disappointment in her expression, just understanding, layered with something quieter. She stepped back to give me space, and that small distance felt larger than the room itself. I reached for my jacket, the fabric cool as I slid my arms into it. Every movement felt deliberate, like I was moving through water. She walked me to the door, her presence calm, composed, but I noticed how she clasped her hands together, then loosened them again. At the doorway, the night air brushed in as I opened the door, cool against my face. I hesitated there, 1 foot still inside, caught between two versions of myself, the one who left because it was easier and the one who stayed because it mattered. "That was nice," I said quietly, a weak summary for something that felt anything but small. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It was," she agreed. Then, just as I was about to step out, she spoke again. Her voice was softer now, almost careful, as if she understood the weight of what she was about to say. "If you stay tonight," she said, her gaze steady on mine, "I'll never let you go." The words didn't land like a dramatic confession. They settled. Warm, heavy, honest. She didn't touch me when she said it. That was what made it impossible to ignore. No grasping, no pleading, just an open truth offered without armor. I could see the vulnerability in the way she held herself still, as if giving me complete freedom to choose, even if it meant choosing against her. My heart thudded once hard. I searched her face for expectation, for pressure, but found none. Only sincerity. Only risk. "You don't have to answer now," she added quietly, sensing the pause stretch. I just didn't want to leave it unsaid. The cool air from outside pressed against my back, while the warmth of her home remained just behind me. Two worlds, two directions. I closed my eyes for a brief second, letting myself feel the truth of it. How staying scared me not because it was wrong, but because it felt real. I looked at her again, at the woman who stood there without hiding, without demanding, trusting me enough to let me decide. And in that suspended moment, with her words echoing softly between us, I understood that whatever I chose next wouldn't just change the night. It would change us that I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I closed the door gently, the quiet click sounding louder than it should have. The night air was sealed out, and with it, the option of pretending this was just another evening. I slipped my jacket off and set it over the back of the chair, my hands steady now in a way they hadn't been moments before. She watched me without moving, her expression unreadable, calm on the surface, but I could sense the careful restraint beneath it. When I turned back to her, our eyes met, and something unspoken passed between us. Not relief yet, not celebration, just recognition. "I want to stay," I said simply. She exhaled, a slow, quiet breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her shoulders softened, the tension easing out of them as she stepped closer. Still, she didn't rush. She reached out first with her eyes, then with her hand, her fingers brushing against my wrist as if confirming I was really there. "Thank you," she said, not triumphantly, but with sincerity. We moved back toward the living room together, not touching it first, the space between us charged with a new awareness. When we sat on the couch, she left room for me to choose where to settle. I closed the distance, sitting close enough that our thighs touched lightly. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into that contact, just a fraction, her body responding before her thoughts could interfere. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She rested her hands in her lap, then slowly turned one palm upward, an invitation so subtle it could have been missed. I placed my hand in hers, feeling the warmth return instantly. She threaded her fingers through mine, deliberate and gentle, as if savoring the simplicity of it. She leaned her head against my shoulder, tentative at first, then fully, the weight of her trust settling there. I wrapped an arm around her, my hand resting at her side, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breath. Her cheek pressed lightly against my chest, and I became aware of how naturally we fit together in that quiet space. "This feels right," she murmured, more to herself than to me. I nodded, my chin resting lightly against the top of her head. "It does," I said. Time seemed to stretch, unmeasured. We talked softly, about nothing important and everything at once. She traced slow, absent circles on the back of my hand with her thumb, a soothing rhythm that made the world feel smaller and safer. I could feel her relax completely now, the confidence she carried blending seamlessly with vulnerability. There was no urgency, no need to define what this meant beyond the moment itself. Choosing to stay wasn't about possession or promises. It was about presence, about sitting there together, wrapped in quiet, allowing something real to exist without fear. And as the night continued around us, I realized that staying hadn't taken something from me. It had given me a sense of calm I hadn't known I was missing. I woke to the quiet kind of morning that doesn't ask anything of you. Pale light filtered through the curtains, soft and unhurried, settling gently across the room. For a moment, I stayed still, listening to the low hum of the house, waking up to the steady rhythm of breathing beside me. She was close, her head resting against my shoulder, one arm draped loosely across my chest. The weight of her there felt natural, grounding, like she'd always belonged in that space. I shifted slightly, careful not to wake her, and she stirred anyway, her fingers curling faintly into the fabric of my shirt before relaxing again. When her eyes opened, she didn't pull away. She smiled, sleep-softened, unguarded. "Morning," she said quietly. "Morning," I replied, my voice just as low. We moved slowly, neither of us in a rush to change the shape of the moment. In the kitchen, she moved with practiced ease, starting the kettle while I leaned against the counter, watching. Sunlight slipped in through the window, catching in her hair, tracing the gentle lines of a life well lived. She caught me looking and raised an eyebrow, amused. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," I said, then corrected myself. "Just this." She smiled at that, a knowing curve of her lips. She handed me a mug, our fingers brushing briefly, the touch familiar now, reassuring. We stood side by side, sipping in comfortable silence. There was no need to fill it. At the window, she stepped closer, her shoulder pressing lightly into mine. She reached up and brushed my hair back from my forehead, her thumb lingering at my temple in a gesture so tender it made my chest tighten. I covered her hand with mine, holding it there for a moment longer than necessary. "About last night," I began. She shook her head gently. "We don't need to explain it," she said. "We chose it." The simplicity of that settled something in me. This wasn't about labels or timelines. It was about presence, about two people meeting each other where they were, without apology. Later, as we stood in the soft spill of morning light, she leaned into me again, her head against my chest. I rested my chin lightly on her hair, breathing her in, the scent familiar now. There was a quiet certainty between us, not loud or dramatic, just steady. Staying hadn't been a single decision made at the door. It was a series of small choices that followed. To listen, to remain open, to trust what felt true. And in the warmth of that morning, with the day stretching ahead of us, I knew this wasn't about being held or holding on. It was about choosing again and again not to let go,